Imagine looking up at the sky and realizing it is no longer blue. Instead, a thick, heavy gray hangs above you, as if the heavens themselves are about to collapse onto the earth. You stand at the edge of a vast golden savanna, where your ancestors once chased endless herds of antelope. But now, the ground beneath your feet is cracked apart. The wind whistles through the sun-scorched grass, carrying with it the unsettling silence of death. You kneel down, scoop up a handful of soil, and it crumbles into dust between your fingers. For thousands of years, humanity survived on the generosity of nature. But today, nature has changed the rules. A shadow is spreading across the world. Most people think disasters mark the end of a story, but the truth is the exact opposite. It was these brutal moments of survival that forced our ancestors to become smarter, if they wanted to avoid extinction. So, what really happened in the distant past that transformed a fragile ape into the most intelligent species on Earth? The answer begins nearly 7 million years ago, with a geological event that changed not only the landscape of Africa, but perhaps the destiny of humanity itself. The rise of the Great Rift Valley, a colossal crack, stretching for thousands of kilometers, began tearing through eastern Africa. It didn't just split the land apart. It divided the future of countless species. To the west of the rift, dense forests remained lush and green. Other apes continued living comfortably among the trees. But to the east, the world slowly became a different place. New mountain ranges rose from the earth, blocking moisture carried inland from the ocean. The rains disappeared. The forests our ancestors once called home gradually withered away, replaced by endless sun-baked grasslands stretching to the horizon. Our ancestors suddenly found themselves in an entirely new world. There were no branches left to swing from, no thick canopies, no dense bushes to hide from predators. Under the relentless heat of the open savanna, standing upright offered a crucial advantage. It allowed them to see farther across the grasslands, while reducing the amount of their bodies exposed directly to the blazing sun. Scientists believe environmental changes like these may have contributed to the evolution of bipedal walking. But changing the body was only the beginning. The familiar food sources were disappearing. To survive, our ancestors had to eat foods they had never eaten before, travel to places they had never seen, and cooperate in ways they never had before. Every crack spreading across the East African landscape seemed to leave another mark inside the evolving human brain. Adaptability became humanity's greatest advantage. Not strength, not speed, but the ability to learn faster than the environment could change. That remarkable brain would soon face challenges far greater than the African savanna, as Earth entered cycles of intense glaciation, lasting tens of thousands of years. Nearly every advantage our ancestors had gained would once again be put to the test. The Ice Age. At the height of the Ice Age, enormous ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere. Humanity faced an entirely new survival problem. We had no thick fur like bears, no heavy layer of insulating fat like seals, and certainly not the strength to confront the giant Ice Age beasts face to face. Most people assume that spears or bows were the inventions that saved humanity. But many archaeologists believe something much smaller played an even greater role: a simple bone needle, one of the most important technologies of the Ice Age. With that tiny tool, our ancestors learned to sew fitted clothing instead of merely wrapping themselves in loose animal hides. Those carefully stitched garments became humanity's very first personal protective equipment. They allowed people to venture deep into frozen landscapes where no other primate could survive. But sewing tells a much bigger story. Creating a complete set of clothing required hunters, hide processors, needle makers, and people willing to pass their knowledge on to the next generation. Every stitch joined more than 2 pieces of animal hide. It stitched people together through shared knowledge. Humanity did not overcome the Ice Age through brute strength. We survived because we learned to transform the smallest objects into tools capable of reshaping our environment. Very few animals have ever done anything like that. And then, after tens of thousands of years battling the cold, the climate finally began to warm. Glaciers retreated. Forests returned. Wildlife became abundant once again. For the first time in countless generations, the future seemed a little easier. But at the very moment humanity began believing the worst was finally behind them, nature changed the rules once again. Younger Dryas, when Earth suddenly returned to the Ice Age, around 12,900 years ago, Just as humanity was beginning to enjoy a warmer world after the Ice Age, nature unexpectedly changed the rules once again. In what was only a brief moment on the geological timescale, large parts of the northern hemisphere slipped back into conditions that closely resembled the Ice Age. The flow of warm ocean currents was disrupted. Winters grew longer. The natural food sources that generations of humans had depended on began to disappear. Once again, our ancestors were pushed to the brink. But this time, instead of simply traveling farther in search of food, some communities began doing something entirely different. They started replanting the seeds from the healthiest plants. They observed the seasons. They kept certain animals alive instead of hunting them all. Scientists believe that the climatic instability of this period may have contributed to the gradual transition from hunting and gathering to early farming and animal domestication in some regions. A quiet revolution had begun, one that started with tiny seeds placed into the soil. For the first time, humans began learning how to produce food instead of merely searching for it. And yet, just as the first villages began to appear, just as people finally believed they had found stability, Earth wasn't finished testing humanity. Around 8,200 years ago, many of the world's earliest farming communities had already taken shape. But then, a gigantic water bomb exploded in North America, when enormous glacial lakes, trapped since the end of the Ice Age, suddenly burst apart. An immense volume of icy freshwater poured into the North Atlantic. It was like injecting a surge of cold blood into the planet's circulatory system. Scientists believe this massive influx of freshwater weakened the ocean circulation that carried warm tropical water toward the northern hemisphere. Within a relatively short period, the climate changed dramatically across many regions. Temperatures fell, rainfall patterns shifted. Once fertile lands began drying out. Young farming communities that depended almost entirely on their harvests suddenly found themselves in crisis. Across parts of Europe and the Near East, archaeological evidence suggests that some settlements were abandoned. Fields that had once been green no longer received enough water. Stone tools were left behind. People were forced to move once again. But it was during this crisis that the intelligence our ancestors had spent millions of years developing proved its value once again. Instead of relying entirely on nature, they began preparing for years of poor harvests. They expanded food storage, improved irrigation systems, and learned to manage water instead of simply waiting for the rains to return. Every time nature changed, humanity learned something new, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. Yet while many communities were still struggling against an unstable climate, another threat was quietly taking shape beneath the ocean floor. This time, it wouldn't arrive as ice or drought, but as a wall of water powerful enough to erase an entire world. Storegga slide, the tsunami that erased an entire world. Beneath the Norwegian Sea, a massive section of the continental shelf suddenly collapsed. Today, geologists know this event as the Storegga slide. The enormous mass of rock and sediment crashing into the deep ocean generated one of the largest tsunamis ever known in the post-Ice Age world. Then, you hear a deep, distant rumble echoing across the horizon. Not thunder, not an earthquake, but the sound of the entire ocean beginning to move. Far off in the distance, a colossal wall of water is racing toward you, as tall as a multi-story building. Within just a few hours, a land that had sustained countless generations disappeared beneath the icy waters of the North Sea. Research suggests that Doggerland had already been gradually disappearing as sea levels rose after the Ice Age. The Storegga tsunami most likely delivered the final devastating blow to what remained. The disaster didn't just reshape the landscape, it reshaped the way humans survived. The communities that remained had to adapt to an entirely different world. They turned increasingly toward the sea. They learned to harvest coastal resources. They developed the skills needed to travel across open water, simply to survive. From a giant crack in East Africa to the brutal surprise of the Younger Dryas, every time nature tried to destroy us, it unintentionally forced us to become something greater. We are not merely survivors of disasters, we are a species forged by them. Every fold in the extraordinary brain you carry today is a reminder of millions of years spent surviving Earth's most ruthless twists and turns. If you're fascinated by the untold stories behind humanity's survival, or by the mysteries of our ancient ancestors, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Join DeepWhy as we continue exploring the forgotten secrets of our planet. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next journey.